Chapter 1. The hour draws late as the word eschaton is uttered in the heavens. The devils gifted have broadened their scope and demonic influence over the world. Suprema Fiducia and its subsidiaries have two goals in mind: to dominate the world's financial system before moving to subvert the religions of men. The network of moral antagonists, known as the flock, act to derail their enemies' worldwide blight by maintaining a watchful eye over their activities through surveillance, confidential sources, and small-scaled guerrilla actions aimed to stifle their malevolent conquest. Gifted individuals in both camps lend their supernatural craft to the ongoing conflict as a singularity is revealed. Chapter 1. The Title Fight. Like most deployed service members, Hunter longed to return to the familiar: friends, family, and the solace of his home, foundational predictability. However, these things provided little comfort due to his preoccupation with the welfare of his teammates still deployed. He felt deafened and silenced during leave and needed to be on the roster, plugged in. Whoever created the leave policy had never served or deployed to a combat zone, because they would know it wasn't the respite they envisioned. It was the cruel breath between drowning, the proverbial wailing wall. Combat was challenging for some, but it came easy to him. The pause button, however, did not. 1 minute you're flying above the desert at 150 miles per hour. The next, you're home, stuck in a Starbucks drive-through line, waiting for everyone to get their shit together. Hunter struggled with the transition from active duty to civilian life. The worst part was being paraded around by friends and family, repeating a career narrative created only for pageantry. Hunter was overwhelmed by civilians repeating the fabricated versions of the war that politicians had marketed to the public. Even the most accurate depictions were half-truths. He felt that he somehow contributed to the public deception when he didn't correct their inaccuracies but wouldn't argue with armchair quarterbacks. The biggest misconception was that the military machine liberated the oppressed, rather than its actual purpose, to secure resources for national and corporate interests. The US descended upon foreign soil with mechanized hate machines, not Red Cross lifeboats. Like most news reports, the public narrative was a facade. No one wants to know the truth because it is ugly, but if they did, they wouldn't care because it didn't touch their lives. Hunter separated from the military in 2018 after serving 10 years on active duty and 5 deployments to Afghanistan. His team's motto was, "Good guys who hurt bad people," and he carried that creed into civilian life. He lived in a state of continual readiness when deployed, where hypervigilance was the norm. However, he couldn't turn it off when he left the military and continually looked for potential threats in his environment. He often perceived threats where there were none, a disorder mental health professionals termed broken radar. Despite its maladaptive connotation, the behavior became validated each time he learned of a new mass shooting. Material possessions held the hollow appeal of sugar-free candy for Hunter, and he longed for a cause, something fulfilling. He heard about a church-based survivors group from someone at the military base and decided to give it a try. He'd been to group counselling before, but was looking for something different, a group that didn't compel members to share. The survivors group met at a church called Edgewater. The parish played an essential role in the community and was well known due to its property value, not for anything faith-related. The 20-some-acre property bordered the Vernon River, and local land developers coveted the earthly prize. They frequented the church more than the parishioners and were always turned away. The trustees of the church had often discussed the sale of the 50-year-old church and their vision of an alternative location and new facility. Still, the conversations always settled upon the greater good, as they knew that selling the property would devastate the surrounding community through gentrification. The church's main feature was a large stained glass window above the pulpit. The brightly coloured scene depicted a figure of Jesus standing on the water's surface with light radiating around his head. He was surrounded by a school of fish swimming up from the water's depths towards him. While unintended, the clear glass surrounding the figure gave parishioners a view of the sky and passing birds, providing a welcome distraction during long-winded sermons. Edgewater had many pastors over the years and was currently presided over by a priest named Father Patrick. Patrick served as a Catholic priest for 25 years before moving to Savannah, and he continued to wear the religious vestments out of habit. He took the position at the non-denominational church to ease into retirement, which the 65-year-old continued to push out each year. Hunter will never forget the first time he visited the church, because this is where he met the love of his life. Patrick's niece, Sienne, had red hair, green eyes, a slender frame, and a rhythmic Irish accent, making all her comments intriguing. She worked as a managerial assistant at the church, performing minor accounting and event planning duties. Hunter sat in the circle of chairs and introduced himself to the other group participants. Having driven his motorcycle through a rainstorm, he was soaking wet. Water dripped from him like a damp dish rag, forming a puddle on the floor beneath him while the room's air conditioner worked overtime, reinforcing the notion that it didn't care about his poor choice of transportation. Recognizing Hunter's discomfort, Sian handed him a towel to dry off. Studying the other group participants as they shared, it became clear that most of the elderly group members knew one another, as they called each other by name. They pridefully made it known that they were present for every service the church held, weaving in clues that loneliness was their true motivation for attending group, treating it as a social event. This lack of earnest contribution didn't sit well with those suffering from genuine grief after losing a loved one, and most stoppage sharing due to the onlookers. It was yet another group that didn't fit Hunter's needs, but he sat through it out of respect for the others. The rain stopped, but the sky was still cloud-covered and dark. Father Patrick stood at the doorway, shaking everyone's hands as they left before walking back inside to close the church for the night. Preparing to leave, Hunter heard the motorcycle exhaust pipes hammering against the structures on the surrounding streets. He estimated there to be about 5 motorcycles as they appeared one after the other, spraying a rooster tail of water behind their bikes like jet skis. The bikers turned toward the church and headed directly to where Hunter was standing. They were gritty, like sand in motor oil, as they parked beside Hunter's bike in succession. They were unshaven, unkempt, and covered in jailhouse ink. Their only unifier was the club's name, Second Death, on the back of their cuts. Glancing at Hunter to size him up, they began launching a tirade of insults about his motorcycle. One of the bikers sat on it, commenting loudly to the others.
I wouldn't drive it, but it might be a good woman's bike.
The group's leader became apparent as everyone followed behind him, addressing Hunter as he walked past him.
Excuse us, miss.
The group laughed as they casually lumbered past Hunter and entered the church. Hunter was irked by their presence, and while the bikers intimidated most people, Hunter was drawn to them like fleas to a dog. Tilting his head to the side, he reminded himself that he was a civilian now and shouldn't get involved. At the same time, his hero complex fabricated the consequences of his lack of action. Ignoring restraint, Hunter walked back into the church to determine the group's intent. The bikers filed into the conference room, startling Patrick.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're actually in the process of closing, but we'll be open again tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Patches on the biker's vest became visible as the man brazenly sat down, putting his muddy boots on the table. They read, "Bad Deed" and "Club President."
Well, we're here now, Father.
Walking up to the table, Patrick sat down across from the man.
All right, how can I help you, gentlemen?
The man slapped the top of the table, jarring Patrick.
I'm here to help you. I'm going to give you some health advice, Father. Tell you what you need to do to stay upright.
Smiling dismissively, Patrick stared the man directly into his eyes.
Son, let me save us both some time here. You might assume that I'm soft, that clergy are removed from the struggles facing the typical person, but my life has been anything but easy. As an Irish immigrant, I know discrimination, extortion, and murder. The poor you know is worlds away from the poor that I know, freezing during winter because you have no heat, eating once a day because there is no food. The same is true of fear. Your notion of fear and intimidation is also much different from mine. You might be familiar with the shoreline, but I know the sea. So, what advice could you possibly offer me?
Patrick's fortitude caught the leader off guard, and he changed his tactics.
Strong-arming you would be a waste of our time. It's the other trustees that will need to worry. Someone from a company called Anathema will contact you and make you an offer to buy the church, which you will accept.
Patrick shook his head in disagreement and responded,
The church is in a legacy trust and is irrevocable. It would require a unanimous consensus, which no one would agree to.
Balling his hands into fists, the man forcefully thrust them onto the table.
Well, you had better convince them, or we will.
The man turned to a squirrely minion standing beside him and pointed to a plaque on the wall.
Bob, pull that plaque off the wall, the one with all those photos and names.
The plaque that conveyed local support and pride for the church suddenly became its Achilles heel. Bob pulled the plaque off the wall and laid it before the two men. He looked over his leader's shoulder as he read the names of the trustees.
You've got a Chinaman named Father Cato, a black dude named Father Walker, and a lawyer named Ashley. Wow, she looks like a bitch.
The leader nodded his head in agreement with Bob.
And some guy named Rick. I hate lawyers. Let's do her first, Jack.
The leader, now identified as Jack, peered up at Father Patrick, presenting a smile of approval.
Sounds good, Bob.
Patrick struggled to maintain his composure as everyone's focus shifted to the sound of footsteps in a nearby hallway. Sienne entered the room smiling and stopped beside her uncle's chair, oblivious to the provocative conversation that had just occurred. Bob was the first to acknowledge her.
Wow, I'd like to make some babies with you.
Bob's statement angered Patrick, and he pushed all pleasantries aside.
Get out!
The bikers didn't move and seemed to wait for directions from their leader. Recognizing the escalating tension, Hunter walked towards the conference room, calling out to Patrick before reaching the room.
Father, we're ready for you out back.
Hunter walked into the biker's view, feigning surprise.
Oh, I'm sorry, Father. I didn't know that you still had company.
Glaring at Hunter for his disruption, Jack recognized that witnesses were piling up. His employer had implicitly expressed his use of discretion, and this order resonated in his head. Jack suddenly stood up and exited the building with his crew in tow, as if they had somewhere else to be. Still staring at Sienne, Bob lingered behind.
I bet you taste sweeter than honey, so I'll be back for you later.
Standing up, Patrick yelled at Bob as he pointed at the door.
Get out!
Bob winked at Sienne as he exited the church. Walking up to the window, Hunter watched the bikers drive away while Sienne comforted Patrick.
Are you all right?
Staring at the table with his hands on his knees, Patrick looked very troubled.
I know I'm supposed to look for the best in others, but I don't have any patience for bullies. God knows it's my weakness.
Sienne smiled and supportively patted him on the back to diffuse the tension. Hunter pondered the similarities between the military and life back home. The enemy and geography might differ, but everything is a battle over resources. He was concerned about the bikers' threats, believing them capable of anything.
I think you should call the police, Father. I don't think they were bluffing.
Patrick agreed.
I've never met them before, but I've seen that big one, Jack, in the news. He's been associated with a few homicides through the years, but no one ever testifies against him. I think his last name is Foster or something like that. I'm not as concerned about him as I am with the company that sent them. Usually you never know who is pulling the strings, but for them to be bold enough to deliver a business card like that, to be that certain.
Patrick realized he was openly sharing his burdens with a stranger.
I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to share my troubles with you. I was just thinking out loud. Thank you for your concern, Hunter. You're right. I'll let the police handle it.
It's not a problem, Father.
Hunter followed Cien into the kitchen, where she was preparing to make coffee. The biker's visit was distressing, and Hunter checked in on Cien's emotional state to determine how well she was coping.
Are you all right?
Grinning, Cien trivialized the biker's threats.
I'm good, and I can handle myself with men like that. I just didn't want to make the situation any worse for Patrick.
She smiled, and Hunter's tension quickly eased. Cien captivated Hunter, and something stirred inside him with every word she spoke. He became aware he was staring at her and forced himself to look away to avoid being viewed in the same light as Bob.
Well, I need to get going.
Cien smiled at him.
Thank you for your help, Hunter. It was nice to meet you.
Hunter smiled back at her.
It was nice to meet you too, Cien. Have a good night.
He felt an immediate connection to her that he'd never felt before. Hunter visited the restroom before heading home, and dry cleaning hanging on the back of the bathroom door swung towards him as the door closed, startling him. He looked at himself in the mirror, saw Patrick's dress shirt and clerical collar peeking out from the pocket, and smiled. Copyright C 2022 by Killer Ravens Publishing LLC. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, or by any information storage and retrieval system, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of very brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. Disclaimer. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, business, events, and incidents are the products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The opinions expressed are those of the characters and should not be confused with the author's views.